All right, we'll give it about a minute or two for everyone to make their way in, and then we will start with our webinar for today. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome in and welcome to the Independent Education Institute Straight Talk webinar series of the day. We are so glad that you have joined us today. My name is Beatrice, and I'm your host on behalf of the IFDF. This is our 44th Straight Talk. Can you believe it? That's wild. We started this back in 2020, and we've made it this far. Some housekeeping rules in order to qualify for continued education credit. Number one, you have to be an IFDF member. It can either be a firm establishment owner, individual member, or affiliate member. You must be logged into Zoom using your full name and remained the entire webinar. No cheating in class. And upon the conclusion of this webinar, you can forward your Florida license number to Heather Bernier, and I will display her email address in the chat box for you to receive your 1-hour CD credit certificate. Thank you, thank you. At the end of the webinar, we will be taking questions. You can post them in the chat or in the QA boxes at the bottom of your screen. We will be monitoring both boxes, and we encourage you to post your questions after the presentation. We are super excited to have Mitch Smith offer the funeral rule solution, which provides participants with the expertise and the necessary skills to mitigate the concerns that arise when having the conversation of funeral planning process, including a blog section where they offer news about e-funeral tips and innovations. I checked it out. It's pretty cool. I saw some human composting stuff. Some beneficial topics that are discussed in the blog are, like I previously mentioned, the human composting and the benefits of the memorial service. So again, thank you, Mitch, so much for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction. And those on the call, I think it always goes without saying, but it goes smoother if we ask questions. I'll be talking at you for the better part of 45 minutes, so I apologize in advance. But I'm Mitch Smith. I'm the sales dude at eFuneral. I was employee number 3, and I've been here on this journey. And as we went to think about content around the funeral rule, we really had an opportunity because we were quite uniquely equipped for this conversation. As we started, we built our entire solution and tool, and you'll see some screenshots of the flow to comply with the funeral rule from top to bottom. Starting back in 2016, our focus was digitizing a connection between a family and a funeral home. Now, quite a few things have changed since 2016, probably even more so between 2020 and today. But since then, we've understood that we are a single piece of the puzzle, but we also know that technology is going to become a larger and larger and larger segment of that puzzle. So giving you the opportunity to frame how you have a conversation with families, think about how you train your staff, how you answer the phone, all along the way. So who is eFuneral? We're an online company that allows families to do at-need and pre-need planning. We're owned and operated by homesteaders, and we've been blessed to work with trusts such as you here at the IFDF to bring those solutions onto our platform. You know, we think about differentiation through us by allowing your families to see how you do things differently. Important disclosure, I'm not a lawyer. I stayed at a Holiday Inn Express last night type situation, and I'm actually in the great state of Florida. I got to be down in Tampa the last couple of days, and I'm doing this from my mother's condo. So thank you very much for your patience as we go through this. Put the questions in the chat, and we'll go through everything together. Now the fun stuff. You know who I am. That was a poor place slide. But the reason we talked about doing this presentation was this exact warning letter that was sent out to funeral homes. About 39 funeral homes that were found in violation of the funeral rule rather. And then as we were continuing to build our content, what happened 11 days later was the Wall Street Journal posted this article. The reason I tend to pause here is because we all on this call understand that going back to 1996, firms have changed hands. There's been new employees. The problem, as this presents it to the consumer, is perception. The funeral rule came to pass in 1985. And at that time, a funeral home partner of ours was one of the first to receive a full violation. And this was their exact words. The person came in, acted as if they needed arrangements, but it was during a funeral. They left, did not get a price. What did they receive later? The fine. This is not shock and awe. You guys are all aware of these things. There's certain things that we can do to help educate our staff from a note-taking perspective, from a follow-up perspective, not only from a providing prices perspective, but making sure that everyone on your staff is comfortable and concise and controlled in the way they have the messaging. eFuneral as an organization, we've learned this rule over and over and over and over again. We've skinned our knees with customers, with regulators, with early clients, distribution partners such as the IFDF, early adopters that trusted us to lead them into this online realm relative to the FTC. We understood that our core competency had to be minimizing our mistakes and making sure our funeral homes were as compliant and complicit as possible with these rules. When we think about the FTC has changed the rule once. 1985 it came out, 1994 it was amended, and not in the not too distant future we're going to see a change. And this is a cool graph, and I think it's important to tell the story. But short of the number of partners and rah-rah from a marketing perspective, if we think about that spike in 2020, I want you guys to stop and truly think about what has happened since 2020. Not only was that boat stuck in the canal and we've had some political things, but consumers have fundamentally shifted the landscape of how they request information, how they get information, and businesses have absolutely bent over backwards to get that information to them as quickly as they can. For anyone that was able to join the event in DC, and they had it in person, and they also had it broadcasted, it was September 7th of this last year. I'm sorry, 2023. Good Lord. Starting in November of 2023, the FTC opened up some opportunities for questions and modifications to any proposed rule. But in September, they met as a group, and there was a group of funeral directors, there was a group of funeral-based lawyers, and there was a consumer group, and they went back and forth. Everyone believed coming out of that meeting that we would have a quick turn response to an FTC rule that would, in essence, put funeral home GPLs on the website. Now, I think everyone here is probably a little bit surprised by the delay or the slowness of that uptick. I think there's some interesting things to think about. We'll talk about those things later. But when we broke down the funeral rule and we're thinking about this to its bare pieces, for us, we wanted to start with something quite simple. Who does the funeral rule apply to? Anyone that offers funeral goods and services to the public. This has changed. This is unique in states like Florida, where there's different direct disposition offerings and partners. The rule, not only does the FTC oftentimes send out shoppers to make sure that everyone's in direct compliance with the rule, or at least is aware of areas where they may have some misguidance, but the rule is there to make sure that consumers are being provided with as much information as possible. Now, if anyone's ever read the funeral rule from beginning to end, we can have a pretty good sense of what goes into this. There is just a tremendous amount of information. The FTC put out this ruling to assume that this was going to drive strong degrees of compliance, which would lead to high levels of transparency with their partners. What this did was create a menu-like document across the entire industry. Everyone had a boilerplate version of it. All the right words were used. Everything was in place. And I think we all understand now the GPL is not enough. All it is a specific document that helps show your prices to your families. The GPL is about making a clean PDF version of what you do today, but I think we can all agree that the GPL is not what you provide to your families. When we did some research with our funeral home partners, we found that their biggest concern was secret shopping. right? The risk that someone took a message and didn't get back. Person demands that they get information over the phone, or someone at the funeral home is asking for a phone number, or one little slip up that puts the funeral home at risk. What we're going to talk about today for the remainder of this time is why the FTC made this shift, why consumers are thinking differently, and ways, whether you use eFuneral or some other version, that you can create a curated experience for these families to go through your website. So it's not just pull up your PDF document and start adding up your tabs, but it really is helping them land on a solution that matters for them. I'm also going to spend some time talking about training. Now, unfortunately, training in this aspect, it has to be broad. I don't know your staffs. I don't know your dimensions. I don't know what documentation you use. But I think it's a really important thing for us to call out, and an important thing for you to think about as you go into the future. Again, we're going to be showing you our software. There's plenty of other tremendous solutions in the system. What we want to show you here is there are solutions, there are offerings, or you can go build something on your own that allows people to see what you have to offer. This creates a more unique experience than just posting a GPL. When, and I'm surprised it hasn't happened yet, but when the FTC comes through and dictates that you have to have a GPL on your website, if you just put the link at the bottom of your page, consumers are going to start adding up your prices and not get a very ideal picture of what you offer. We view this as a tool for your team. Any of these tools are a tool for your team. You cannot get the price without viewing the GPL in any of these experiences. The very first thing you do, they see that button that says price list, they click through. We have had less than 1% of people actually click through and download the GPL. And we have presented it to over 205,000 families. Now, the cool thing about that is that number is actually probably closer to 2010. This is an outdated slide, but I think the number is still pretty important. 205,000 times we gave someone the GPL before our system ever talked about pricing. We understand that there's a tremendous number of ways to have a conversation about a service. Whether you're the highest priced brand in your market or the lowest, whether you're the oldest or the youngest, everyone has a story. And I can admit, seeing prices on a screen may not tell the story that you want. But when we think about the curation of confidence building within a consumer, this becomes a critical part of an audience that you may not be reaching today. When we think about the next stage in the process, when we talk about package selection, eFuneral, again, there's others that do it well. We understand that there has to be some language presented and there needs to be some things met. Raise your virtual hand if you have a cell phone. I bet dollars to donuts, which is something my grandma used to say, never understood what it meant, that's either an Android or an Apple. Raise that same hand if you shop online. Maybe a little bit eBay, likely Amazon, right? It feels like a broken record. We do have these tech things coming in that are becoming so ubiquitous in our life that they are dictating the way we have to shop across all platforms. Is that good? Is that bad? That's a whole different webinar series. But given the context here, what we understand is we need to show them the price from high to low. We need to tell them what's included in each of those packages. And even more so from a compliance perspective, to meet the FTC regulation, we need to know that they have options. We want them to understand, burial or cremation, that if something in the system is not met, they should feel comfortable and confident knowing that they can go to you and your staff to meet those regulations. Now, I say that very specifically, meet those regulations. It's not to say that they wouldn't have had a tremendous experience if they were in the funeral home, or if that person called in that someone on your staff couldn't have guided them through the experience. But making sure that you are as blunt as possible with your online wording as they go through the checkout experience is a really, really, really good way to ensure that you and your staff are making sure you're checking the box in the funeral rule and proving that you understand best-in-class user experience from your Apple, from your Android, from your Amazon. The next stage for us when we think about presentation of merchandise, this is going to be really unique across the country. Different states have different regulations about what needs to be presented, how much needs to be presented, what needs to be included, is it guaranteed, is it not guaranteed? So I'm not going to go into the specifics of that. You guys understand Florida. What we understand is the tool can help you show a hyper customized level. This can be as simple or as dedicated or deep as you would like it. We want to show that things are guaranteed or not guaranteed. We want to explain what that is. As you see here, we have this guaranteed item. We dive into what guaranteed means. What we know the tool does is not only help drive conversations over the phone, helps mitigate price shoppers from ever having to reach out to you. But from a merchandise perspective, the things that you've spent so much time with your vendors on to get right, to make sure you have the right photos and the model numbers and the prices, and you have your funeral home set up, that we're accurately demonstrating that, not only from your efficacy perspective, but from the consumer's perspective. They understand what you're presenting is the same online as the same that they get over the phone, as the same as they get in person. It's something as simple, and this is a funeral home partner. As we go through, we're going to show all the options that you want us to show. It's a simple select. And I pause on this screen for two reasons. Number one, something that surprised us a little bit with the online experience. When we presented options in this manner, we had consumers have a 15% higher average sale than similar consumers who were selling directly to a family in person. Now, who knows why? I think we can all have anecdotal experiences. My wife says I need a breathalyzer on my Amazon app. We go in with our arms crossed. Arms crossed is a closed mind. What does a computer do? It naturally uncrosses your arms as you brace your desk and you brace your mouse. The consumer is guiding themselves through getting to a point in a package that makes the most sense for them. Not only do we want to show this, I'm showing you some demonstration purposes here, but a lot of funeral homes want to give us additional context about what these things are, or how the corners can be modified, or any of those things that you would walk through in person. Not every funeral home has that level of desire or depth, but I want you to think about the tool that you select and making sure that the guided experience that takes them through the shopping, that is not just a GPL, is giving them the omni-channel experience in the same one that you would give them within the funeral home. On the cremation side, we understand that they need to be presented with specific options, very similar to the previous example, but we also need to make sure that we're checking the funeral rule and giving them the right to choose the container that makes the most sense for them, be it the minimum alternative, all the way up to anything else that you have in your inventory. These things feel very block and tackle, and they're very obvious to you as funeral directors because you live this day in and day out. But as you think about the presentation, you think about what's being offered, and you think about what the view from a consumer is, that's important. But this presentation alone is to make sure that you're thinking through the lens of the FTC and checking all those boxes to make sure that you're following the rule to a T. From there, we always want to make sure we have a no selection available. I know this has become quite the topic for conversation as I've traveled around the country and met with funeral directors. They're seeing an uptick of things like Costco supplied caskets. Again, not necessarily the space to think about whether that's good or bad, and everyone can have their opinion on that. I'm sure we're all aligned in some form or fashion, but this gives the consumer total control. The funeral rule was designed to give them the ability to see, select, and ultimately decide on a series of options or packages that is exactly what them and their family would desire. When we think about additional things that have changed from 1985 to 1994 and 1994 to 2025 and beyond, regulations tend to not get less strenuous. So what we would expect is there's going to be more things asked of you. There's going to be more things asked of your website. There's going to be more things asked of your staff on the phone. And having tools like this or anyone else in the space that provides an offering gives you the ability to feel better that knowing that consumer hitting your site is covered and you have a tool for your family. When they call in, and of course, you and your team will handle all those things in person like you always have. The same goes for the grave liner, and a lot of these slides are redundant, and the fun part of this presentation is towards the back end, if you ask me. But what I also think about is this. There's all these things that the FTC is going to ask us to say. We need to make sure that we talk to them about funeral costs. We need to make sure that we talk to them about basic services. We need to make sure we understand that they don't require embalming. We need to understand, if we're going down the burial side, that there may be different or varying costs at other outside organizations for burial. What we've done along the way is not only help check those boxes to make sure that you're getting that information in front of the consumers, but do so in such a flow where you can have whatever options you want in these tools. Assuming this what will cemetery be used is a question. Almost all of our funeral homes have follow-up questions about what type of cash advance do we want to put down? How many death certificates are we accounting for? Some of our funeral homes even have overweight cremation fees. What we tend to say is this is an area for you to ask the questions that every single family would be asked as they walk through your door. Not only does this allow them to educate themselves on their own, but that self-guided experience is going to be the same as the phone call. It's going to be the same as you at the desk. The prices are consistent. The visions are consistent. The experience is consistent. You're allowing the consumer to select and buy how they want while keeping yourself as compliant as possible with the funeral rule. I like to pop this up because I'm sure every single fee you have in your area is $150, but you have total flexibility across as many of these as you want to have. It gives you the ability to change them on the fly, and we never charge for ongoing updates or to the system. So as your funeral home updates their prices, funeral homes in your area update their prices, you need to match pace. Cemeteries change fees. You can come to us and we have those things updated oftentimes by the end of the week. And then finally, we need to show them a full rundown of all their selections, clearly stated, itemized with noted with guaranteed and not guaranteed. And this is where things start to get a little tricky when we think about the 2025 changes and beyond. When we think about the funeral rule engulfing a website, we think about the funeral rule stepping into an online sphere, which it hadn't before. If we think about the 1985 version, there's lots of talk about mail. They were pretty excited about fax machines, right? A few things have changed. But what hasn't changed is the consumer's desire to understand what's available to them. When we think back to those original documents, we think back to those 39 funeral homes who were identified, and we think back to the larger number that the Wall Street Journal identified. It's hard to look like the FTC and certain bodies of organizations are not painting the best possible picture for the funeral space. And as it lined up for that September 7th meeting, for those who were able to watch it, it was a hearty dialogue back and forth where the funeral space was spending time talking about the merit of what they do, the family-run organizations. The consumer side of things was simply talking about clarity and transparency. So it became a very, not contested, but it became a very clear divide between the funeral space, the funeral profession, and the families in the space that we're able there to present. So thinking about this in terms of a different lens and moving into the fun part of the presentation, this is where I like to think about this. Don't think about people coming to your website as different. Don't think about people walking in or calling in as better. Please change your vernacular around price shoppers. Every single one of us here on the call is a price shopper. The reason is every product has a price. Every price has a purchase. Price shoppers fall into a natural progression. If whoever took econ or the bell curve, every funeral home has an average sale price. What we see across our partners is not only do our funeral homes on average sell the exact middle of the road package that they have set up in their system, but they're seeing that happen more often than they would expect. So just having your GPL online does not mean you're going to get price shoppers. And even better, having your GPL online gives you an opportunity to have a different or better conversation, not only with those bottom of the barrel price shoppers, but those who don't know what question to ask. I heard a tremendous analogy yesterday. I got to present with someone from Homesteaders, and they were talking about the fact that they themselves are not handy around the home. Their water heater went out, and the only two questions that they knew to ask were, how much does it cost, and when is it done? Now, I think if we think about going into a mechanic setting or any other avenue where I don't have enough information to be able to form a deliberate opinion, we only have two questions: how much and when can I get it? So when you start the conversation with the family, it's not that price is their penultimate focus. It not even be the third or fourth on the list, but it is a question that they know to ask. And if you think about the information being provided to funeral homeowners or provided to consumers rather, what should I sit down and talk to a funeral director about? You're going to see a myriad of things. I've seen reports with up to 75 questions where I should ask, does the funeral home provide Wi-Fi? How many parking spaces do they have? The confusion and convolution of what is not a shrouded industry makes it really challenging for the consumers to believe that they're understanding what they see. This is a fun little chart. And this is the decline from 1990 through 2018. And it is not Florida Gator national titles. It is not hurricanes. What is it? Boom. Oh, my slide didn't come through. I apologize. This is U.S. divorces since 1990. Kind of wild, right? I remember when I was going through marriage prep, every single thing I heard. I can't say I ever read a stat. Maybe just someone was felt good about saying this and it spread. All 50% of marriages end in divorce. What has changed since 1990? We were objectively in the best era of music. We came into the early 2000s, we had Y2K. I think you're starting to get the sense technology started to come into the dating scene. And why does this matter? When we think about a dating relationship, we think about an experience that's as personal as meeting someone else online. We think about an experience that's personal about finding a mate and settling down. We think about that same level of clarity that you may have planning a loved one service. There is nothing more intimate than those final goodbyes. And I use this as an example to show you that technology not only is becoming the source of information, it is becoming one of the most trusted sources of information. 50% of people are more likely to receive and believe an online review from a stranger than their friend. Weird, right? Some people would say, oh, my friends are amazing. I don't know about you guys. I love my buddies, but they are full of it, right? I'm not going to talk to someone who hates Indian food about the restaurant down the street. If this person's never been to New York City, I don't care about their take on Chicago style pizza, right? I can trust these people online because they are objectively saying what they think is good and what they think is bad. And what do we all know is the most powerful type of review? The negative one. I heard another funny quote yesterday. You can never cremate a bad review, but you can bury it. And you bury it by making sure that you're delivering an experience that you want to your families. A tool like us, other tremendous experiences around the profession, or something you build on your own. But instead of just giving that family a GPL, guide them down an experience. And why do we care about this? Everyone walks through my door. I've served every person in my community. This bald dude coming here thinking he knows everything. I don't know everything. But I do know this. Baby boomers spend 27 hours of their week online. That is 1/4 of their waking hours. Now, baby boomers are still at the keyboard, right? They're still at work. The majority of online shopping is done during work hours. What are they searching for? Things that matter to them, especially as they get towards the end of their career. They may not be as involved or invested in as many projects as they once were. Things are slowing down, and they're giving them an opportunity to think about asset allocation. How am I going to help my mom as she goes through this? 48% of baby boomers will visit a company's website after seeing their content on social media. There's some stats that just came out from the FDA, and some of them were quite compelling. But the number one thing that struck me was the number of funeral homes visited and how that's changed over the last 5 years. It has gone from 1.2 up to 2.5, the number of funeral homes that someone will consider before finally making a purchase. And if I think about that purchase process, knowing that I don't know Heather Bernier's funeral home name by heart, I don't know what her www.com is, but I do know how to Google it. What happens when I Google it is I'm presented with all sorts of information. That information is going to drive me down to an experience where I'm either going to learn or I'm going to buy. Now, I think this last one's probably going to surprise nobody, and that 92% may include funeral services, but this is everything. Groceries, water bill. They're transacting for a good and service online. So this picture paints baby boomers, who objectively are the market we have for pre-need, are spending a lot of time online. They're likely willing to visit a site. Now, it's not 50%, that's better than 0% or better than 1% that you make it off a direct mail campaign. And most of those people, if not all of them, have done some shopping online. So why are we even talking about this? It's like, why is the funeral rule changing? Why do we have to go through this experience? And why we're going to have to go through something like this every 10 years? Because the change of technology is going to be so rapid that we're not going to be able to keep up. It's because people are unique and people are really, really good at getting what they want. If anyone remembers the very first car ad that had prices on it, it was Saturn. They're not even in business anymore, but you can't see a single car ad without prices on it. When we think about the decisions of how things changed, and when I first joined this profession, I was able to talk to my grandparents. Now, may they all rest easy, but I remember talking about, hey, have you thought about services? How do you think about this? All of them had the same answer-ish, right? I went to church with, I served with, I was in a club with. At the end of that with was someone they knew and trusted. As things have changed, people have become more nomadic. People have become under-churched, underbanked. That's an interesting one. People are using different types of financial services. When the same questions come up, what we're met with is an abundance of choices. The problem recognition is the same, and the purchase is pretty similar. But what has changed is the search for information, the evaluation of alternatives, and the purchase decision. Now, when I was getting my MBA, this flow was everything. And if you could see me, you'd appreciate I've got a beer belly. I spent my entire dissertation on craft beer. I was fascinated. It was all about how I get a consumer to open a can. And it was about how wine was classy and wine was beautiful, and the label had to have a certain arc. And the beer can, the louder it was, the more obnoxious the art, the more people used it. Consumers are really good at getting what they want. Government is decent listening to consumers. In this instance, they're forcing action. So what do we have now? We have consumers who don't know where to go. We have consumers who don't know what question to ask. We have consumers who are forced to go online. So what we have now is I have a problem recognition. I know I need to prearrange. In the middle is this jumble. And the better you can be at solving that jumble, the more effective you'll be at having a pre-need conversation with that family. Now, this is a pretty simple one, and this is a slide that goes back to 2020, but it's so powerful to me because this is the basis of what we thought about when we rolled out eFuneral. So we hit the market in January of 2019, and we did so with the concept of we knew that this was going to grow. Right? Homesteaders wanted to be first and foremost in making sure funeral homes were equipped to have the conversations that families wanted. Early on, and COVID had some changes, they were saying that 46% of families were handling arrangements virtually. If we can recall back to 2020, what did we have a lot of? Feelings. Aside from that, plastic partitions, right? We had 6-foot separation, can't come into the funeral home by state regulation. People were having to do these things online. eFuneral had to give their services out. We did so gladly to help people sell where they couldn't before because people were disconnected. What did that shift? Now step away from funeral services, step into your everyday life. What do you do more now than you would have done back in 2020? I can answer that question from my perspective. I've got 2 hockey players. I haven't been into a grocery store in 3 years. I'm not adverse to it. I think it's a cool experience, but I trade off my time and capital for spending more time with my kids and my wife. I'm willing to pay a premium to have those delivered to my door. And when we think about using that logic, and now that consumers have the ability to use that drive and desire to get more of what they want, we can see that 52% of them will only do business that have their prices online. I encourage you all, if you're sitting there at your cell phone right now, Google funeral homes near me, those words. Do it on Google, do it on Bing. You're going to get kind of a unique experience. And if you're at the top of that pile, really, really nice work. You've put a lot of time into your search engine optimization. You put time into your reviews. You put time into all those individual pieces that matter from a consumer perspective, matter from an algorithm perspective, and to the great overlord that is Google, you've met and checked all their boxes. Now, what I want you to do once you Google funeral homes near me is click into those websites. What you may see is a serene swan floating by. You may see a picture of a hearse. You may see a sprawling lawn. And then take off your funeral director hat, put on your consumer hat, put those 3 websites next to each other and say, what is different about these brands? There is some tremendous technology providers in this space. This is an opportunity to think about not only how do I meet the funeral role, how do I train my staff, but how do I make sure that I am telling the story that I want? Because I promise you this, if you're not telling the story, someone's going to tell it for you, or the consumer is going to make it up. And 73% of people believe it's important to have pre-planned funeral arrangements. Does anyone know what the percentage of people that actually plan services is? Bueller? 14, 15%. 73% of people believe it's valuable. 14%, 15% pull the trigger. What does that spread and why? Is it because they don't have money? No. Situationally, but possibly. Is it because there's not a desire? No. It's because they're busy and they're demanding convenience and transparency. There's a book that I quote a lot, and I should have put a slide in here so you could see it. It's by a guy. It's called Ideas That Stick. And in there, it's talking about duct tape and talks about monkey wrenches and certain brands that are ubiquitous in our minds, but The name of that product has associated itself to the brand. Kleenex is another great example. Chapstick. These things are part of our life, and we constantly verbalize the brand as opposed to it being an adjustable wrench, as opposed to it being a box of tissues. But in there is this concept of curse of knowledge. Curse of knowledge is something, once you know something, you can't unknow it. Like, let's talk about maybe your favorite summertime fruit. Bigger than football, medicine ball, kind of oblong, green on the outside, dark green stripes, red fruit, black seeds. I'm not talking about apples, right? There's no way that you could unknow what I just explained to you was not a watermelon. The curse of knowledge is this. Consumers' curse of knowledge is funeral homes are expensive. All they want to do is take my money. Funeral homes' curse of knowledge is they need to come in and see why I'm different. You are different. You need to tell that story. But just assuming they know that and not telling them or giving them proof is going to leave you looking just like your neighbor who is not doing the same job that you are. So when you think about this, and there's a little bit of a role play that I'll be doing by myself, so I might even like kind of move back and forth on the screen. When you think about this omni-channel experience, the best example of an omni-channel experience you can think of is any brand that in your world that does it really, really well online and really, really well in person. It's the exact same. The business case for the worst mess up in omni-channel experience history goes to Best Buy. Best Buy had an online version and they had an in-store version. Both Best Buy, both Best Buy. Back-end system run by Best Buy employees, Best Buy people in their polos working the stores. But each of those brands had different quotas and they had different prices. So when a consumer would go into the store, they would convince them or deeply discount them in store so that they would make that same purchase. This omni-channel experience that they tried to build created competition, not only for the people at the individual locations, but confusion for the consumer because they didn't know what they were getting. So if they're sitting down with you at a table or you're in their home, or the person at the front desk answers the phone, or they go onto the website, making sure that you're checking all the boxes from the funeral rule is so important. And I was not able to survey all of the 39. We talked to a lot of our funeral homeowners that were surveyed and maybe have been given things that they need to work on. Most of that came around the phone. And I want to spend a little bit of time from a role play perspective talking about how you could formulate and train your staff to think about driving this message differently. If I was a person calling into the funeral home, what are the two questions I know? How fast can you do it? What is your price? I've had the honor of traveling around the country and spending time with the homesteaders account executives, sitting in funeral homes, sitting back and watching how they operate, because I love to learn how I can use technology to make things easier in the funeral home. And what I saw over and over was this: phone would ring, they would cover their mouthpiece, they would turn their head, and they would say, "How low can we go?" All that did for that consumer was revalidate that price shopping is okay and that's how you do it. I want to propose this. You put an experience or a solution such as eFuneral onto your website, and you can change the dialogue into something that looks more like this. Calls received by the funeral home. The pleasant intro. Thank you for calling. How may I serve you? Consumer goes, what's your cheapest price? Right now, you can ask for their name. Perfectly legal and compliant. If they don't give it, no concerns. If they do give it, you now have a nice parlay into a conversation. Because the sweetest word in the English language that everyone loves to hear is their own name. Hello, Mitch. Thank you for your time. I can absolutely tell you that. I can tell you right now, our basic cremation starts at your price point. I can even do you one better. If you have some time, we can go through some options. We can do this one of two ways. You can come in and sit down and talk to a staff member of mine. But if you're not quite ready to commit to that, we actually have built a solution on our website that shows you the entirety of our experience. Okay, what's your website? You know what? A couple options. I'll tell you, it's www.mitchamazing.com. Even easier, if you want to, I can text it to you. Sure. Now, you can ask for their phone number. They don't have to provide it. But what a unique experience. The number one way people are going to get lost in the internet world is by hitting Google. If they Google funeral home near me, I hope you guys still have your phone up. If you're not top of that list, they're going to be looking at every other option on that screen. They're going to be looking at the Google reviews, pictures, whether you're open or closed, all those things that have become quite ubiquitous for us in the way we shop, the way we pick restaurants, right? We believe and trust in Google's methodology. As that conversation progresses, I may start to say, hey, the first thing we would like to talk about is, do you have a disposition in mind? And they go, I kind of just thought about cheap, but I don't really know. So why don't you talk me through that? Well, even better question, is this going to be a near need service? Is your mom in hospice, or is this something you're going to be planning for the future? Clearly, my wording can be fixed. But as you start to break these pieces down and expand the conversation, they have a tool in their hand that broke their arms being crossed. They're open, they're communicative. You may even have got their phone number if you played your cards right, and they're in an experience where they are in control. So as they ask for the cheapest option, they want to know what's included. You can give them a copy of the GPL. It's in their hand. They've been presented with it. They cannot see your prices until they check that box. And so as this goes through, we can think about now hiring a person to sit at the front desk that doesn't necessarily have full depth of funeral knowledge. Maybe they're just incredibly enjoyable person to speak with, or they are vibrant, or they just want to be in the community. You could teach them the ins and outs of your services and your packages. You could teach them what makes them different. You can show them the story that you want them to paint. And as they go through and those questions are being brought up, the system can help validate not only what the consumer wants to see, but make that conversation easier and easier and easier for your families. They're going to see specific merchandise. They're going to see your levels of service. They're going to see what your baseline products remove relative to service. When I first started in the space, as many of you have, I'm sure, you spend a lot of time around people that are coming from Matthews and Batesville. And the story for them has changed, right? They historically sold boxes and they've become memorialization companies because the way things are moving and the way things are growing, the continuation of what will be a service will change. I'm here in my mother's condo. I help my mother and my father with their plea planning services. What they often tell me is, cremate me and throw me in a ditch. I go, self, breathe. Mom, sounds great. Let's also consider that there's other things and people behind that we need to account for. Those people who are price shopping, those people who are online shopping or guiding themselves through the experience are not saying, I want to cut corners. They are not saying, I don't view services as important. They are not saying, I don't want to be remembered. What they're saying is, I don't know what questions to ask. They're saying, I have seen so many services over time, I want mine to be different. And this is an unbelievable opportunity as a profession for us to reshift the concept of price shopper into information seeker. Guide them to the point where they understand what's being presented to them and make them feel amazing that your brand, your staff is going to help their family on their worst day. And when they walk away with that pre-need in hand and they're feeling confident about all the services, they're going to talk to their friends and family. And we can begin to cut into the Google being the number one driver of traffic. Homesteaders uses the stat. It said 75% of people that plan services only called one funeral home. That story doesn't tell the entire picture. If you layer that on top of the NFDA information that we talked about, 60% of people are visiting 3 or more funeral home websites. What does this mean? They're going through each of those websites. They are researching what they want. When they pick up that phone, they're already decided. So whether you think about eFuneral as a solution or someone else in the profession, what we encourage you to think about is how do you use a tool to get them over the finish line? We have been able to, and it should happen between now and Christmas, we will have our $1 billion in funerals quoted. We will have sent our $75 million in leads. So we've sent $75 million worth of leads to our funeral home partners. And we've been able to sell $44 million worth of funerals, about $1 million a month. What's cool about that is that $1 billion number. People are fundamentally interested. People want to know what you do. People want to know why you do it. People want to know how you do it. And people want to talk to you, but they want to be confident that by the time they pick up that phone, they're making the right decision. So as you think about any changing tide or what the FTC is going to bring to the market or anything that's going to change the way that we functionally operate as business owners, we need to make sure that we have the tools in place that lets the FTC rule be met, allows your staff to be more productive, allows your funeral directors to be driven leads, allows your funeral directors to meet with family and staff, and allows your consumers to be so confident that they would never, ever pick another offering. It's always a pleasure to be presenting with IFDF. This is the second opportunity I've been able to do a straight talk. I love the way that you guys think about content, and I hope that this was able to paint a picture about how things could be differently proposed to consumers to help them think about end of life planning. But I do want to open up the floor to questions. I saw Mr. Heath was with us, and he is always so wonderful at sending us questions. But if anybody here has any comments or they want to talk through experiences or anything else that I can provide clarity on, please, 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 please let me be your guide. If not, my contact information is on the screen, and I want to be a resource to you at any time.
Thank you so much, Mitch. All right, attendees, do we have any questions? I don't see anything in the chat box either. So, Mitch, thank you again so much for sharing your
Thank you.
expertise. And I definitely agree with you in the area where you mentioned how the internet has created such a huge impact, along with social media, but a huge influence on divorces. But a trend that I've seen, of course, and we've all seen it, we're all guilty. We're so quick to speak our minds and leave a negative review on a business, unfiltered and creating a sink or swim situation. So I have to resonate, and I'm guilty. We all are.
Yeah, and we did have a question come across.
We did, we
So
did.
the question was, how often should we update our GPO? Um, this is a loaded one because I think the reality of the driver of this is you guys are being hit with price changes coming across all the time from your vendors. I don't think there's necessarily a most ideal or a best time. I've heard funeral homes doing it as frequently as every 3 months, and I've seen funeral homes do it as often as every 2 years. I think it really depends on the depth of price competition in your market. I would say if you are on top of it, every 6 months is probably enough. Every year is probably good. I would say if you start to get into the 3 months, you're spinning your wheels. There's other things you could be focusing on. And as you start to go past a year, you might be missing some nuances or changes in the market. Another question that I was asked yesterday, I gave a different presentation on Monday, or Tuesday rather, but the thing that was really interesting to me was that they came up and they said, hey, if you had a single dollar to spend on a marketing tactic or effort, what would you do? How would you drive the most traffic to your website? And I thought this was really telling. So this is a little bit of a step outside of the funeral rule piece, but I think it's important to know. If I had a dollar, I would ask myself this: am I worried about pre-need traffic or at-need traffic? If it's at-need traffic, quite simple. I'm going to spend money on Google. I'm going to spend money on Bing. For those who do that, you understand that the money being spent on Google doesn't go as far as it goes on Bing, but Google has rolled out a very new experience, and they rolled this out actually kind of with plumbing originally. But you can go on, and I encourage you to look through this. You can go on to Google and claim yourself in that, and you prove that you're a funeral home, you prove that you offer the services, and basically you get Google's check mark. So then when people start to Google things specifically, your brand based on AI is going to be popped up, and it's going to be a unique phone number to you. And whenever they call that, and it's going to be Google will generate this number for you, it'll ring into your funeral home. You only pay for that ad when they hit that link. Kind of a cool way to think about money. If I was to spend money on pre-need marketing and try to drive someone to the website, I would do it in two ways. I would start by creating videos with my cell phone, meet my staff, be funny, be jovial, be honest, be transparent, show them what you do, right? Bring them through your facility. If you go on to TikTok, and I'm not saying that you do, it's quite a unique experience if you've never been on, but there's a lot of wonderful funeral directors on there that are making the profession more transparent in a really respectful way. And they're reaching a really, really young audience who is now begging to make sure that they don't have to deal with anything. What you have with us as millennials is our parents want less services, and the millennials are wanting more services. It's going to ebb and flow for all of time. It's just the way that trends tend to go. So if you think about, I want to drive more at need, spend your time on Google. If I want to drive more pre-need, Facebook is going to be a tremendous asset. Content is going to be a tremendous asset. Show your face, show your voice, record a video, spread it, and be able to tell a story when they come to your website. Also, anyone here, go onto your websites right now, click on your pre-planning tab. Do any of you ask for vital statistics right away? Would anyone here give the full breadth of vital statistics information away for anything? No, we would never do that. We would never give our social security number to a dealership. We would never give our grandfather's military service to anyone until I had enough information in my hand to prove to me that this was the product I wanted and the place I wanted to buy it. So go through each one of your tabs, go through each one of your links on your website, do it on your phone, go through the experience that your consumers are feeling. If you don't love your experience, get a hold of your website provider, find an amazing partner like Welton at Ring or any of the preferred partners with IFDF. They can have conversation with you. William sent a question. In terms of the enormous data breach we experienced in Florida, how does eFuneral protect our family's data? Great question. So that's a multi-factor answer, but eFuneral is SOC 2 compliant. So SOC 2 compliant is just one of the highest levels of configuration. And we have actually a higher level of data security than a lot of the insurance companies around the space do. It just goes to how we secure our passwords, how we secure our networks, how we have constant monitoring onto our systems. It's a double hashed, salted, encrypted code. All that means is it's very, very challenging. Even if someone were to steal the data coming out of a system like ours, it would be totally unreadable and usable. So we put a tremendous amount of energy into how we think about data and how we protect it, because we have people's personal information. And we also follow all the California CPRA regulations in the event where someone like William or whomever wanted to have their data cleared. We follow all those regulations. I would do this. Data security is a complicated one and a confusing one. I would say I would not personally try to tackle it. I would look to your partners to prove that they already have their pieces in place and their ducks in a row, because there's just so many things to consider. And it's going to be outside of your scope of expertise unless you have a cybersecurity background and you have a technology, you have acumen in development. Partner with developers who have put those pieces in place and have already thought about those things, and you'll be in a good spot.
Those are excellent questions. Thank you so much. Do we have any further questions for Mitch?
Thank you all. I very much
Thank
appreciate your
you.
time.
Thank you. All righty, Mitch. Well, let me conclude this webinar by providing a friendly reminder to everyone to please forward your Florida license number to Heather. I have posted her email address within the chat. You can go ahead and copy paste that so that you can request your CE credit if you have not done so already. Our next and last Straight Talk of the year will be on Wednesday, December 11th. It will be on the autopsy, introduction for funeral professionals, and interesting case examples, presented by Dr. Daniel Schultz, founder and president of the Autopsy Doctor. For more information, you can always visit our website, www.ifdf.org, under the events section. Thank you again, Mitch, so much for your presentation this afternoon. We truly appreciate you now and always. And thank you to all of our participants for attending in this Straight Talk series. Stay safe, make wise choices, and we wish you all a happy Thanksgiving. Thank you. Take care, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Bye-bye.